This is the Big O Show. This is the Big O Show.
All right, there he is, locked and loaded and looking styling. You're styling today.
Yeah, man, a little bit. Got to do a little bit of TV action here. So throwing on a little suit and tie and getting ready for my day. So,
That was what Sean goes, oh, he's sharp. And I said, well, he's probably got TV.
Yeah, different than my usual T-shirts, right? I look typically not as slobby as I usually look, because that's what you're trying to say, huh?
Well, no, I'm more of the slob, but I'm just because Sean was thinking like you were dressing up for us. I'm like, no, dude, it's not for us.
Yeah, no, I'm going right here to this backdrop in probably about 20-25 minutes to set up for TV. So, yep, you get the suit, you get suited cam today.
All right, so it looks to you like there's going to be no Austin Jackson, right? I mean, you don't practice Thursday, no side on Friday.
Yep.
Looks like that high ankle sprain. I don't know if there was a setback or not, because he kind of sounded, one of the things that Mike has kind of burned himself with is timelines, right?
Yeah.
He was so positive about Byron Jones, and then that didn't happen, and then kind of gave us a little oomph last week about, well, Austin Jackson's practicing, and so he's got to be kind of careful with these timelines.
Right. I think you learn stuff as a new head coach, right? He's trying to be forthright, which we appreciate in the media. And because you remember, a lot of coaches, especially the last coach here, used to say day to day on every injury. A guy can have a torn ACL, and it's like he's day to day. And so Mike McDaniel's trying to help us out a little bit. Hey, this guy will be back by then. This guy will be out, a couple of weeks. And so I appreciate it. But sometimes with injuries, you get yourself caught up in that perspective. And like you said, Byron Jones is a perfect example of that. That was something that, they expected him back by camp. And there are things that happen. Like, I think there are things that happened in this Byron Jones situation that have, impacted his impact. But same with Austin Jackson. You say, hey, IR, people think 4 weeks. And when you start practicing, you say that, and then your offensive coordinator says, we're optimistic. And then you don't see him for 2 weeks after. People were like, what happened? And so I think for all of these things, you just kind of want to make sure you get guys fully healthy. I mean, we saw it with Armstead. You don't want guys lingering with injuries so that it gets worse. Like Teron indicated, his has got worse through playing with it. And so you give him essentially 2 weeks off, and ideally he comes back and can play the rest of the season. So a lot of these things are kind of subjective rather than we hope that it's, is it 2 weeks? Is it 4 weeks? Like, what is it? That's sort of my deal there. But I think, like most things, first-time head coach, once he gets a little bit more time, a little bit more years, unfortunately, he'll probably be less forthright on injuries, and he'll be more exact and precise on what the timelines are.
All right, so I asked Poupart this. I want to get your feeling on this. How long is the leash left on Liam Eichenberg before Robert Jones gets a shot?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd imagine that they're giving Robert reps in practice. I think that the element that's hard here is that Liam Eichenberg is a guy that you ideally need not only for now, but in the future. And so you have to figure out if this guy can play or not. If you bench him, it's hard for him to come back from that. Like if you're benching him at guard, you're essentially saying we're done with him unless an injury happens. And so I think that from a front office standpoint, they're probably wanting to avoid that and really get a true answer on him. But I think from a team and a coaching perspective, you have to figure out, is this guy limiting us in their ability to win? The other element of this, and I talked about this in camp, is the chemistry. So you could say on paper, hey, Robert Jones may be a better fit, but does he have the reps next to Teron Armstead and Connor Williams? Maybe he might be individually a better blocker, but maybe together in unison, it may not flow as well. And so, like I said, if you make that move, it's such a drastic move for a young player that you may never get Liam back, mentally from that sort of thing. And so I think when they make that move, they've got to be sure. And I think maybe it's a little too early. Now, that being said, could they do something like replacing a Greg Little? I could see that being an option, and maybe Brandon Shell, who is now up to shape, maybe he comes in, but that's a different situation where you have a veteran guy in Greg Little who's probably not in your future long-term versus a guy like Liam Eichenberg who you spent a second-round pick and traded up to get, and you're hopeful that he will be, even though he hasn't shown it so far in his career.
All right, I'm sure you've gotten DMs and texts and all that stuff. Dolphin fans are pissed, and they should be pissed, and they should be frustrated. The way things were handled with Teddy, the way the things were handled with Tua, and then they watched the way things are handled with Pickett this week, where he was cleared right away to be in practice and play. Your thoughts on all of the clumsiness of the NFL with all of this?
Yeah, it was a surprise to me. You know, I went into the start of the week expecting that Mitch Trubisky would be the starter here. Just kind of what we've seen from the concussion deal here in Miami. I don't know that there's been a lot of players. Actually, I know that there hasn't been a lot of players who have cleared the concussion protocol within a week, and especially for him to be doing it as quickly as it was. So it surprised me. But what I will say is a lot of stuff in this concussion protocol things have surprised me. Like, I've learned there are things that are in my expertise and things. I don't know if you got like a tornado going on there.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I have an F-14 flying above.
But I've learned, like, over the last 2 or 3 weeks dealing with this concussion stuff, there's more stuff I don't know than I do. And so this honestly is not my expertise. I thought that a guy would be out at least a week, but he was cleared to practice by Wednesday. And I will say, like, Dolphins fans want to make that comparison and say, oh, the Steelers are doing something wrong. Well, from what I understand, Tua actually went to Pittsburgh, and some of the people he saw were the same people the Steelers players see there. So those are the experts, the people who cleared him as independent doctors. And so I don't think the Steelers, doctors are doing anything wrong here. I think there's just a lot of stuff we maybe don't know. I don't know what the mitigating circumstances were that forced Teddy to sit out. Maybe it was the fact that he was seen with a sign of ataxia, or maybe that I would be speculating at this point to say I know. I do know that the Steelers reporter has asked Mike Tomlin about it several times, and so he was grilled pretty good about it, and his stance was pretty straight line. I am not a doctor. The doctors told me he was clear, he was good to practice, and so he's out there to practice. And so that's sort of what Mike McDaniel said with Tua. The only difference is that Tua, obviously got hurt the next Thursday, and so I don't know. I think that this is a situation where, because of the Tay and Tua situation, Dolphins fans are going to be upset. I think more likely than not that there's no wrongdoing here, but it does seem, at least from the optic standpoint, there should be some clarity on what the timeline should be. It shouldn't be different for two different situations, especially one in Teddy where, the team said he didn't have a concussion at all. And so he essentially missed the whole week for,
no reason.
Yeah.
For no reason. Hell, he missed the whole game for no reason.
Right.
He should have come back to that game. There was no ataxia and all that. And I think, I can't blame Dolphin fans for being incredibly pissed off at the inconsistencies of the way that is all being handled. And, listen, man, I just, the problem with all of that is that everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part that we're going to have to understand, and we're going to have to come to grips that some guys will be like Ethan Carter, and some guys will be like Tua. Tua seems to be like the dude that overcomes this stuff really quickly.
Right.
We're all wired differently, my man.
Right. And even Tua, like, people, kind of make the quick notion because of what appeared to happen in the Bills game and then what happened to the Bengals game. But this Sunday night will be 3.5 weeks removed from game action from the Bengals game for Tua.
24 days.
And so, yeah. So even if it's still been time, like, even though Tua, is recovered and he's a fast healer, I do think that he's taken 3.5 weeks, which is, a lot of care for a lot of players. Most players, I'd say, miss an average of 7 to 10 days with the protocol. And so obviously his was more significant. He had to be taken to the hospital, that sort of thing. But it sounds like the Dolphins have done due diligence. They sent him to other doctors in Pittsburgh and Detroit. And so, obviously there's always a chance he gets hurt again, but it seems like the Dolphins have done right by this. And yeah, I mean, I get it from Dolphins' perspective. You want everything to be even. I just think that with things like concussions, it's an inexact deal. And I think people would love for it to be more black and white. Like, you leave Sunday, you're not playing the next Sunday. Where it's right now, it seems a little bit more vague, and the Dolphins feel like they got the short end of the stick. Dolphins fans do. Yeah.
And by the way, in the middle of the interview, when I was doing the thing like this, I was
taking pictures.
I was just being childish. They were taking pictures, and I was just adding the feathers above their head. Well, that's what it was. So that's why. So, and by the way, apparently it worked. So because they were kind of laughing at that. All right. Injury wise, what's the one injury we should be concerned about?
Yeah, I think the good injury, I'll start there. Teron Armstead, it looks like he's going to play on Sunday, which is a huge deal. Like Tua obviously is a huge factor. He was a big reason why they were 3-0 and why they were 0-3 without him essentially for much of those games. But Teron Armstead, it's such a huge cog in this offense. We've seen over the last couple of weeks when he's been hurt, just how the offensive line decimated without him. And so if he's back, he said his functionality was impacted by the injury. Now he's actually practicing for the first time in over a month. He hadn't practiced since the Patriot week. And that's wild in week 1. And so he's playing through it without practice. Now he's practicing. So maybe he's even better health-wise than he was from week 2 to 5 and 6. And so that's the good news. I'd say the most concerning, I would say, is on the defensive side of the ball, particularly at the cornerback position. They haven't really made any outside moves. I think there's probably a likelihood they promote one of their corners, maybe Tino Ellis, who's on the practice squad. But right now, you've got two guys who, Keon Crossan, Kader Kohu, both of those guys dealing with injuries. There hasn't been an official call there. They really need those guys, at least one of them, and ideally both of those guys to play because you're playing a team in the Steelers that has 3 receivers and Deontay Johnson and George Pickens and Chase Claypool to really test your depth. And so the Dolphins, Mike McDaniel doesn't seem super concerned about it, but, I'm a little concerned and especially a team that blitzes and runs as much man as they do, they really don't have much margin of error. So, Emmanuel Ogbah's also questionable. That's one we're going to watch, probably go up to game time. But I think the corners and their health there is going to be the big deal to watch.
All right. What are you, well, by the way, see if you agree with the rest of us. Who's playing right tackle?
I don't know for sure, but I would probably start Brandon Shell at right tackle.
Okay, all right, you all agree. So it's the worst kept secret out there. Okay,
yeah, that would be my view. Yeah.
Okay, all right, we all agree, pretty much that Brandon Shell should be starting over Greg Little at right tackle. I think there's a little extra buzz in the building about him. They're like, in other words, from what I'm hearing, there's a pleasant buzz in the building that they found him off the street. In other words,
right. Yeah, and I mean, this is a guy who started games, for last 6 or 7 years. So it's a situation where a lot of these guys, they're looking for a starting job or a specific role. And at some point, you just figure, hey, I'm assigned to it. If I want to play, I got to play. I mean, we saw it with Chris Harris playing last night. Chris Harris, the cornerback, that was longtime Broncos and Chargers guy. This is a guy who has been a starter his whole career, signed to a practice squad like week 3 or 4 once he realized he wasn't going to get the starter role or the starter money. Brandon Shell, probably the same thing. And so, I think that he's to my opinion, a better player than Greg Little. Like, it's just simple as that. Like, if you put him against an edge rusher 10 times, Brandon Shell may stop the player 8 times, and Greg Little may stop him 6 times. And so I think it's a noticeable difference. And so once he gets caught up and once he gets more comfortable in the scheme, which it seems like he's getting closer to that area, I think that becomes a pretty easy decision that Brandon Shell should be your right tackle when Austin Jackson's hurt and your swing tackle even once Austin Jackson's back healthy.
What are you picking?
I think the Dolphins should win this game. Tua's back. I think the offense will get a burst back to not necessarily fully back to where they were in the first 3 games, but I think you'll see a deep shot or 2 connected with Tyreek or Jalen Waddle, and I think they'll put up maybe 24 points up there on the board. The defense holds its own. I'd say maybe a 24-17 win for the Dolphins.
All right, 24-17. I'll take that. Follow him on Twitter at Cameron Wolfe. Catch his work there at the NFL Network. Always getting it done. Cam, appreciate you, my brother. We'll catch up on Sunday night, late Sunday night. Hopefully we're talking about a victory.
All right, now. Appreciate you.
You got it. There you go. Cameron Wolfe, man. Good stuff there, as always. That is our KSDT, CPA, Miami Dolphins, and NFL report.